Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Madam President, District Presidents past and present. It's a great honour to be back here at Wellington Club. It's probably about 7 years ago that I was a guest here. It's lovely to see the fellowship continue in such strength. Right. Okay, so this is your club. 97 years ago. The clock is ticking to the centenary. This is the 7th of June, 1921, down the hill on Willis Street at 150, actually, Catalyst House today. And actually on Catalyst House is a plaque that was put there in about 2011 because it was the foundation venue for the New Zealand Olympic Committee as well, and used by many organisations in Wellington. 36 businessmen, professionals and community leaders gathered to form the Wellington Club then. And it's a bit small, but there's the president, 39, relatively young, 39-year-old Robert, and his vice president, Charles Odlin. Charles had actually been to Rotary in North America, and so when the International Rotary Association sent special commissioners to Australia and New Zealand to establish Rotary in Australia and New Zealand, Charles Odlin, the timber merchant, was a great help. But in amongst here, we also have Sir Harold Beecham, father of Catherine Mansfield, director of the BNZ. We have a cabinet minister, William Downey Stewart, who served in the First World War. Sir Ernest Marsden, professor, scientist. And for some reason, S.P. Andrews is not working today. S.P. Andrews was one of the great photographers in Wellington and did a lot of photography for the Crown during this period. But today, he's getting his photo taken. This is a wonderful photo. I just found it this morning at the Alexander Turnbull Library. I thank your committee down the road that have contributed your archives to the Alexander Turnbull Libraries. That makes a historian's job much easier. So this is the start of the Wellington Club, and it's the start of Rotary in New Zealand. A little footnote, Auckland Club started a week later. If I'm in Auckland, I tell a slightly different story. So, the story of the development of Rotary, the history is going to tell that within the wider context of New Zealand society and culture, and in terms of Rotary's contribution to the betterment of New Zealand society in a whole lot of areas, and but especially in terms of welfare, child health, education, the environment, and also in terms of improving the local economy. Really the first New Zealand Inc. Thinkers in New Zealand. Mana tangata, people in action, has to be looking at the flax roots, looking at local clubs and their members, and they will feature large in this history. We'll look obviously at the different forms of service throughout the community, but also overseas in terms of New Zealand's contribution. I'm studying at the moment and researching at the moment, starting at the beginning, because beginnings of organisations are important because they flow on in terms of its DNA, in terms of the culture. So in the 1920s, New Zealand and Wellington and Auckland, with the two Australian clubs, were the first to start a conference of Rotarians from the Pacific Rim in the mid-1920s. The first conference was in Honolulu, so Aloha Rotary. And so it's always been about looking further outside of New Zealand to the Pacific. Case studies will feature large in this history. And here's the first major case study for Wellington. It's Truby King came to a meeting only a few weeks after the foundation in June 1921, And the commitment straight off the back was to build him a Karitani home for Plunkett at Melrose. That was a huge commitment, $1.2 million in today's money, and it took a decade to pay off that debt for the club. But it was an early commitment to the future of New Zealand in terms of the welfare of children. So this history is obviously for clubs and members, but it's also for all New Zealanders to learn about the Rotary's contribution to New Zealand and social, economic and cultural history. So there's a few themes, and service is going to be right up there. Now, in the 1920s, amongst those founders was quite a number of returned soldiers. There was Dr. Herbert, who was a major in the New Zealand Medical Corps. Now, Dr. Herbert went on to be the first district governor, New Zealand district governor. And there was a number of other soldiers. So that sense of service, that huge commitment of service coming out of the First World War, it was a big thing in terms of the 1920s to ensure that that generation, that they had not died in vain, and service in the community was a big part of Rotary and very much a sense of 1920s New Zealand. So looking at service, how it's changed throughout the last century, through looking at Rotary's history, and Rotary's obviously contribution to New Zealand society, and all those major projects, and also in terms of kick-starting so many organisations. In Wellington, it's Wellington Free Ambulance, it's CCS Disability Action, it's Outward Bound. And the distinctive contribution of New Zealand also within, around the world, from the uttermost ends of that Rotary, how did New Zealand contribute, but also what is distinctive about Rotary in New Zealand. It's obviously going to reflect our Kiwi culture as well. The story will be told chronologically from the start to today, but in each chapter I'm looking at 4 areas which are the significant areas of Rotary. So obviously in the club, it's about meetings like this, it's about the fellowship, it's about how club cultures developed and its role in communities and society in New Zealand. For the community is all those good works, and that's going to be a major section of every chapter. Serving the future is looking at our new generation service, mentoring, education for youth, student exchanges, and across the world, what role did Rotary New Zealand play in the Pacific region in particular? I spoke about that first conference, which is really the start of the 1920s. It's going to be well researched. I have a PhD in history. So it's going to be scholarly. It's going to be based on evidence and research, but it has to be written in a lively study. So my previous work has been looking at the RSA organisation, and it's about getting members to know their history, but also the wider public. So lively. So this is some of the examples from the RSA history. These are double spreads from the book, and so you could see this might be the history of Outward Bound, and of course we'll have to have a section on the future. Because why should we tell our history? Often everybody's involved in day-to-day actions that we forget to stop and take stock to commemorate those that have gone before and done such good works, and to celebrate those good works. New Zealanders are very much modest people, but there's so much to celebrate here. History strengthens our sense of identity and belonging, and it allows us to tell our story. And I can see this book being a great gift to visiting Rotarians, but also when you go overseas to leave hosts with our story. And finally, ka Māori ka muri, walking backwards into the future. Your history, knowing it, informs our actions going forward. And as a former chief executive, I know that I used history a lot in terms of the RSA organisation and its future and pathing that. Knowing your history puts decisions into context. So this will be a relevant living tool going forward. So it's going to be a landmark publication. You should be very proud of your history, and this is going to tell it in 2021, something to be able to celebrate, have in your hands, and the ability to share your story with your community, with the nation, and with Rotarians overseas. Thank you for your time.